now. We'll give it just a minute and then we'll let Sharon and Connor take it away with our evening here. Okay, we are live. Go ahead and take it away, Sharon and Connor.
Okay, welcome to the 2021 Virginia Primary Election Candidate Forum Series on Developmental Disability Issues. We are happy to have representatives from District 38, 45, 47, and 49 with us tonight. These forums are designed for you from the comfort of your home. We want to thank the ARC of Northern Virginia, the Autism Society of Northern Virginia, and CRI. And special thanks to the Virginia Board for People with Disabilities Training Alumni Association for supplying the interpreters and a captioner. We also want to thank each and every one of you watching live now or watching it taped at a later date. Now, I am proud to introduce my son, Connor, who will say a few words on the logistics, and then the amazing Lucy Beadnell, who is our moderator for the next 90 minutes.
My name is Connor Cummings. I am a self-advocate and proud to be autistic. Please remember this is a sensory-friendly forum. This is not a debate. Talk about what you can and have done for individuals and families with disabilities. Share your disability experience and plans if elected. Please concentrate on you. Let the other candidates concentrate on themselves while you talk all about you. No raised voices, please. Thank you for respecting the sensory-friendly instructions. This is your opportunity to answer our questions and to hear our stories. Not just today, but every day you are in office. To all of you watching, these candidates are here because they care. Thank you for being here to respectfully listen to all candidates. This is our opportunity to hear a disability platform to help ensure that our representatives include us in their decision-making, not just mentioned, but a seat at the table. These are the primaries. One of these candidates in each district will win and move on to the general election. We will host again during forums during the late September, early October timeframe. And remember to always vote because our voice matters. Now here is Lucy to start the questions. Lucy?
Thank you all so much for joining us. And we've got a lot of folks here who have been at some of our forums this past General Assembly primary season or in forums before, but we'll give a quick reminder on the format for anybody who's new and of course for our candidates. So we'll go through each district and give each candidate a question to introduce themselves, whatever they think is important about them for us to know, and past work on disability policy and future plans for helping the disability community. Then we'll ask each candidate questions in turn. We'll rotate around so no candidate has to go first each time, but we'll keep candidates in the same order so that they know when they're coming up. First, we're going to start with the 38th district. And Delegate Corey has not been able to hop on and join us just yet, but Holly Hazard, who is running in that seat, is able to hop on and join us. So Holly, we'll let you step into the question seat here first, and I'll get you pinned on the screen so we can see you. Fire away with your introduction.
Thank you so much, Lucy and Sharon and Connor, for your wonderful introductions. I really appreciate this opportunity to be with you. I have spent my life working as an attorney on social justice issues, protecting animals, and giving a voice to those without power. And I understand the power of organizing, speaking up, listening, and being present. As PTA president, I've worked with families trying to navigate the public schools to get the best for their kids, listening to parents who were struggling and just could not navigate the bureaucracy. Personally, one of my best friends has a sibling with an intellectual disability. She was born at a time when her parents were encouraged to send her to a home. Her parents said, no way. And they were pioneers in keeping families together, pushing the public school system to have all kinds of kids playing and learning together. And this was in the 60s and 70s. I understand the ignorance, although a lot has changed. We have a ways to go. Now, one close friend has a child diagnosed with autism. I've seen the power of advocacy and privilege in guiding this wonderful now young man. He's graduated from school, he has a great job and an independent life. But I also know that this is because he had strong, educated, and determined parents, and many are just not that lucky, and it shouldn't take parents feeling like they're fighting every day for someone to have a fulfilling, happy, healthy life. I have spent some time talking with Lucy and Shannon and just listening, and I applaud their advocacy and certainly the power that Connor brings to the discussion and advocating for himself. ARC and the people you support deserve better from Virginia, especially in this time of unprecedented excess revenue and a federal pandemic relief package worth over $10 billion. Now is the moment. The state has not done its part to ensure equity for people with disabilities. We have a system that invites crisis, and when in crisis, the costs go up for Virginians. We need to reduce or eliminate the wait list for Medicaid waivers, and now is the time to do that. We're losing ground here every single year, and it's just not good enough. We need to revisit the ratepayer for waivers. It doesn't do any good to get waivers if the residents can't find people willing to do caregiver jobs because the rate's too low. And now is the time for Virginia to step up and correct our failings of the past. We have the money and we have the need, and all we need is the legislative will. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And I got a message that Delegate Corey was having some tech issues, but is here to join us. So I wanted to give just a moment, Max or anyone else on her team, if she's here under a name other than Kay Corey or Delegate Kay Corey in the attendee box. Oh, I'm seeing Ross Corey or Kay Corey. Sorry, everybody, right? This is the weird part about Zoom. So I'm not seeing that here. I'll do one more quick check through as I scroll through attendee names, and I don't see it. Okay. And I think Sharon and Connor were reaching out to them too. So thank you all so much as we work through some tech stuff, and we'll loop back to Delegate Corey to give an introduction here in just a moment. So now we will turn things over to Delegate Levine, the incumbent in the 45th district, for the same question. Just please take a moment to introduce yourself and tell us kind of about past work on disability issues and some future plans there.
So thank you, Lucy. Thank you to the ARC of Northern Virginia. It's always a pleasure to work with you. Thank you to Sharon. Thank you to Connor. Really appreciate your advocacy. Good to see the Mickey Mouse ears again. It's a little bit deja vu for me because we had a forum about a week ago where we asked these questions, so I'll try not to go along now. But most of you know me. You know that I serve on the Health, Welfare and Institutions Committee with my good friend Delegate Hope, who's right here, who's endorsed me for delegate. But also, I really take these issues very, very seriously. I've always worked to help vulnerable people. And whether it's child abuse or victims of domestic violence or sexual violence or guardianship reform, I always try to look out for the people who don't have a voice to help themselves. One law that I'm very proud of that I introduced and passed into law last year is a law to teach school teachers how to de-escalate situations. It's particularly important, I think, to those with disabilities. It's important to all students because any student can have a bad day, but particularly folks with disabilities, it's not their fault. They have these disabilities, it's who they are, and teachers need to know how to deal with folks. I strongly believe that, well, we're gonna get into more policy in a minute. In terms of who I am, I was an activist for about 25 years before I ever joined the House of Delegates. I do know what it's like to be left out. When I moved to Virginia, it was actually illegal to have a gay relationship. It's kind of wild how far we've come just in the last 20 years I've been here. And I've worked to promote equality for everyone. And in the House of Delegates, I am the chair of the Public Safety Subcommittee, as well as the chair of the Constitutional Amendment Subcommittee. So I do a lot of very important work, but I have always been supporting the rights of the disability community. And I know we're going to get more into that. So I'm looking forward to the discussion.
Excuse me, Delegate Levine, let me have your last 10 seconds. This is Delegate Kay Corey. I can't get in through the internet, but I am in on the phone. So thank you, Delegate Levine, for letting me
Absolutely
interrupt.
perfect timing. And Delegate Corey, you can hold on to that mic and feel free to introduce yourself on the phone and give some indication of your past work for the disability community or future plans.
Right now? Okay.
Yeah, go for it.
Thank you. And thank you. I am sorry. I was really looking forward to seeing people's faces and at least to be able to smile at all of you. I am Delegate Kay Corey. I represent 38th District. I have been in office for for 10 years. I'm running for re-election, and right now I want to talk about the work that I have done for the disability community and to share the good news with you that I've recently been appointed as the chair of the Disability Commission. And if Connor is there, because I can't see him, I want him to know that I'm looking forward to working with him. He's on the commission also. I have worked for, I've been an advocate for the developmentally disabled ever since I was on the Fairfax County School Board. One of the things I worked to achieve on the Fairfax County School Board was to enhance the workforce development opportunities for the developmentally disabled. And as a delegate under Republican control, I've worked to boost the awareness of measures to increase inclusion, from equal physical access to the legislative buildings and rooms, and to signage that would be seen by those who have low vision, as well as encouraging and demanding actually closed caption options. I have also founded the Art Abilities Show 5 years ago. This show is an opportunity for developmentally disabled artists to display their talents in a way that reaches a very large audience. The last year that we had the show, we had it in a hotel in Richmond, and we were able to have a gallery available for at least a week. A number of the artists who display their work have gone on to further careers because of the connections they made in the art show, and also been able to secure funding for innovative projects. And for years, I have fought to add discrimination to the list of, to add disability discrimination to the list of types of discrimination that are illegal in Virginia. And you may know and perhaps already talked about the fact that this happened in the last session. And it was an occasion to celebrate. One of the very first pieces of legislation that I worked on for the developmental disabilities community was in partnership with now Speaker Eileen Fillercorn. The federal law was changed about the savings accounts that parents could have for their children, their developmentally disabled children, to use after the parent's death or incapacitation. And Eileen and I worked to bring the increased tax deduction and rules that made it easier to start these savings accounts to Virginia. I have to say, that was a challenge, but we were able to get it done. I'm not going to list all of the pieces of legislation that I have either initiated or helped initiate that will affect the developmentally disabled community, since almost everything in our budget, for example, affects you. But I'm happy to say that our budget under the Democratic majority has actually increased the number of slots available. While embarrassingly not enough, we have made great strides. And Lucy, I'm sorry, I can't see a clock, so I could go on, but I think
We'll
I
let you off the
probably
hook.
used up my time. I think I used up my time. But I did want to say one small thing about family life education that is accessible and usable by those with developmental disabilities. And that is something that is really, really important. And I look forward to implementing that soon. So Lucy, thank you very much.
Thank you so much for being with us, Delegate Corey, and for troubleshooting through tech issues. That has been one of the many skills we have all learned over the course of the pandemic. So as a reminder to folks, the 38th district is currently represented by Delegate Corey, and Holly Hazard, who we heard from first, is her primary challenger. And then we heard from Delegate Levine, the incumbent in the 45th district, and we will now pass the mic over to Elizabeth Bennett Parker, who's running in the primary to represent that district.
Good evening, and thank you to Connor and Sharon and Lucy for bringing us all together and organizing this event. My name is Elizabeth Bennett Parker, and I have the honor of serving as the Vice Mayor of Alexandria. Both of my parents were in the Navy and instilled in me a sense of service to our community and our country. My mom in particular used to always tell me that if you're not part of the solution, you're part of the problem, and I've applied that to my entire career. I started a small business to fight food waste, both the negative environmental effects, as well as the fact that we waste food while members of our community go hungry. Later, we merged with the nonprofit Together We Bake, which I now co-lead, where we provide job training and other support to women returning from the criminal justice system, women experiencing homelessness, women who've recently immigrated, and women surviving abuse. In turn, that experience inspired me to step up and run for the Alexandria City Council in order to address many of the challenges I saw our women facing more directly. I'm proud of the work I've been able to do as Vice Mayor. Working with my colleagues, we've expanded access to early childhood education, increased the supply of affordable housing, enhanced outreach to residents regarding SNAP or food stamps, declared a climate emergency, and took concrete actions to cut our emissions because we need to do more to fight climate change and its impacts. With respect to policies and programs that we've created that affect people with disabilities, earlier this year, we passed an accessory dwelling unit policy. These allow residents to have another housing unit on their property, whether that's a renovated garage, a new structure, or a unit within a pre-existing house that has its own kitchen, bathroom, and bedroom. ADUs can help with housing affordability as well as accessibility. This policy change faced opposition in our community, but it was supported by our Commission on Aging as well as our Commission on Persons with Disabilities, and we passed it in January. In the past few months, I led our effort to update our government procurement policy to award extra points to firms that employ people with disabilities. We also established a pilot program to have a trained therapist respond to behavioral health crises, calls that come into 911. And as part of our effort to reimagine public safety, we also passed a strong independent community policing review board last month. I also introduced a budget amendment that added an additional $1 million for affordable housing that passed unanimously earlier this month as well. And this kind of collaborative, results-driven leadership is why I've been endorsed by our state senator, Adam Ebbin, 2 former delegates who've held this seat, Marian Van Lanningham and Rob Krupika, every member of the Arlington County Board endorsing in this race, every member of the Alexandria City Council endorsing this race, the Fairfax supervisor for this district, and other leaders in our community. I look forward to continuing to work with them and with you all to make our community an even better place and to build back better after COVID, ensuring that we center underserved communities, including people with disabilities, as we rebuild better. Thank you so much, and I look forward to continuing the conversation.
Thank you so much for joining us tonight. And now we'll hear from Delegate Patrick Hope, who is representing the 47th district currently, and he was kind enough to join us tonight after his primary challenger was removed from the race. So we are very grateful for his time here, but you won't be hearing from a challenger in the 47th tonight. So Delegate Hope, please take it away.
Thank you, Lucy, and thank you to Connor, especially for a great idea to bring people together. You know, we've got to make sure that we pick the right candidates to ensure that we prioritize a life like yours. And I certainly want to thank the ARC of Northern Virginia as well. You are probably the most effective advocate that I've seen in my 12 years in the General Assembly. And I mean that. We've seen a lot of different groups come and go, but the ARC of Northern Virginia is consistently the best or advocacy group that I've seen, and the most effective as well too. In 2008, I was so proud to receive the Rusty Garth You Are the Change Award by the ARC of Northern Virginia. Some of you that don't know Rusty was an advocate, a parent in Arlington. I got to know Rusty very well through my work on the Community Services Board, and I knew his son Ryan very well too. We lost both of them tragically. But the legacy of Rusty lives on, because he was in himself, he was an institution and someone that wanted to see some change. And he worked very hard in advocacy to do that. I should say I represent part of Arlington County, the 47th district. This is my 6th term in office. I'm running for my 7th term in the General Assembly. I chair the House Public Safety Committee. I'm on the House Welfare and Institutions Committee. I'm on the Courts of Justice Committee. I chair the Joint Commission on Healthcare. I'm a member of the Disability Commission with Delegate Corey. I'm a member of the Deeds Commission, which oversees our mental health, and I'm on the Substance Abuse Services Council as well. I frequently get asked, because the disability issue question comes up for me because it's so much a part of bills that I introduce and budget amendments that I introduce, of why it's so important to me. And I think the main thing to know about my interest in helping people with disabilities is it started when I became a Special Olympics basketball and soccer coach many years ago. And it was from that experience that I really got to know a lot of the athletes who were probably some of the best athletes in the world. And I got to know their living situation. Some lived at home with aging parents, some lived with group homes. Some group homes were good, some group homes not so good. And really understanding the policy behind where people lived. And that got me interested in the state issues. And I was appointed to the Arlington Community Services Board, where I quickly was elevated to the chair of the MR committee, which we changed to the Intellectual Disabilities Committee. And of course, as you know, that has been a thing that we've done throughout the entire state, is change the terminology. And then I eventually became chair of the Community Services Board, which I served for 3 or 4 years before I was elected to the General Assembly in 2009. I think the best way to sum up my legislative philosophy is probably to quote Hubert Humphrey, who said, "The moral test of government is how well it treats those in the dawn of life, our children, those in the twilight of life, our older adults, and those in the shadows of life, the sick, the needy, and the handicapped." And I believe that disability rights are human rights. And a top priority for me going into this session, and frankly, since I was elected, was to end this Medicaid waiting list. We are now at 13,000, and I will tell you that list is growing. And when I was first elected, before then, in 2008, I believe a resolution in the General Assembly was passed to end the waiting list in 10 years. And we've missed that 10 years. And I think it's embarrassing that we have not been able to end the waiting list. So I'm very supportive of efforts to end that list. I've probably put in, and I'm probably responsible for in budget amendments, thousands of new people added to the waiting list of I shouldn't say the waiting list, but I should say ending the waiting list, adding more waivers, probably thousands that I've put in budget amendments over the last 12 years. I directed the Commission on Youth to review our policies for seclusion and restraint in public and private schools. That was a bill that I put in 2014, which turned out to become a law. I passed a bill in 2019, which removed the R word from the criminal code, something that we did in the rest of the code early on. We left in the criminal code. And in 2019, I passed a law to remove it completely and replace it with intellectual disabilities. I passed a bill in 2020, last year, to create a study work group for training of Department of Corrections employees to deal with people with disabilities and people with autism, to make sure that they're treated appropriately. We've also passed legislation during the past special session in 2020 on training, police training in the academies, and recertification training on interacting with people with autism and other disabilities as well. And of course, that will continue to be improved. And the other thing that I'm looking forward to is working with Delegate Corey on her commission, is to change the word of handicap out of the word of the code and change it to people with disabilities or a similar type of thing. So I'm gonna go ahead and stop there. I could go on, but I don't want to do that. Thank you again for having us, and I look forward to the questions.
Thank you so much for joining us. And now we'll hear from candidates running to represent the 49th district, which is near and dear to my heart because I live there. So first, Incumbent Delegate Alfonso Lopez, please introduce yourself.
Good evening, everybody. Thank you, Connor. Thank you, Sharon. Thank you, Lucy. I greatly appreciate working with Lucy and the folks at ARC, at ARC, and the folks at L'Arche. And I see a lot of friends on tonight. For those I haven't met, my name is Alfonso Lopez. I've been a delegate for the 49th district for 10 years. And I'm the majority whip of the House of Delegates. I sit on the Rules Committee, the Labor and Commerce Committee, the Agriculture, Chesapeake and Natural Resources Committee, and the Public Safety Committee. I'm also on the Insurance Subcommittee, the Energy Subcommittee, the Firearms Subcommittee, and I'm the chair of the Chesapeake Subcommittee, and I chair the Virginia Small Business Commission. As your delegate, I've been a champion for our values in Richmond, fighting to make Virginia a place where we lift everybody up and leave nobody behind. Over the last 10 years, I've been the patron, co-patron, or the chief co-patron of over 150 bills signed into law, addressing everything from small business procurement to protecting immigrants to tenant protections to criminal justice reform to expanding temporary assistance for needy families, and sensible gun violence prevention. I'm especially proud of my legislation that created the Virginia Affordable Housing Trust Fund that served as the backstop for eviction prevention during the COVID-19 pandemic and provided housing for thousands of families, including hundreds of families right here in the 49th District. And as the House Majority Whip, I'm honored to have, among other things, increased teacher salaries, banned the death penalty, legalized marijuana, perhaps most importantly, expanded Medicaid and health protections to 500,000 Virginians, including 45,000 folks in our region. Throughout my time in office, I've worked hard to provide more aid for those who need it most. Since being sworn in 2012, I've always fought for Medicaid expansion to keep us on a path of Medicaid for all and help support efforts to increase access to Medicaid waivers. My work on the Affordable Housing Trust Fund has also played a critical role in the disability community. The trust fund mandates accessible housing while also outlawing discrimination based on source of income, a problem many with disabilities face. In recent years, I've also worked with Delegate Guzman on legislation making it easier for those with disabilities to seek employment in the state government. And I've worked with amazing advocates from the community like Daniel Davis on improving banking accessibility for the disabled community. And as delegate, I've also helped incorporate protections of disability rights into the Virginia Human Rights Code to make sure that no matter who is in control of government, that they have an obligation to protect and support persons with disabilities. Going forward, I think we need to finally eliminate the ID and DD waivers. I've spoken with Lucy on this for years. It's incredibly important. We need to start by ensuring that, and also Virginians with intellectual and developmental disabilities are not invisible. I think it's important that their social determinants and their health outcomes are not invisible as well by emulating the Biden administration and strengthening data collection in our health surveys and programs. We need to emulate other states and eliminate sub-minimum wages. We need to start properly funding special education in our public schools and also guarantee that there's a system in place to make sure this money is spent in a beneficial way. This requires increasing the frequency at which we review accessibility and support for students in special education programs. And we need to strengthen our oversight of private schools as well. As Delegate Corey said, and as Patrick Hope alluded to, I could go on for hours, but I look forward to your questions this evening, and thank you all for being here tonight.
Thank you so much for being here. And now we'll turn the microphone over to candidate Karishma Mehta, who is also running to represent the 49th District. Welcome.
Thank you so much, Lucy, Sharon, and Connor, ARC of Northern Virginia, and the Autism Society for hosting this vital conversation for us on disability justice. As Lucy mentioned, my name is Karishma Mehta. I'm a preschool teacher and candidate for the House of Delegates in the beautiful 49th District. My story is the story of so many people who live here and across Virginia who have faced discrimination at work, struggled to pay rent, skipped meals, and worked for starvation wages just to survive. My parents came here from India seeking a better life, and they struggled with rent, school lunch debt, and lack of health care, all without the protection of a union. After I graduated from college, I inherited those struggles as well. I worked long hours and for sub-minimum wage to help pay down my student debt that I still have as a renter along Columbia Pike. And when I became a teacher, I had to skip meals and avoid the doctor to fund my own classroom while watching my students struggle with the same obstacles that I grew up with. That's the reason I decided to run, to break that cycle of inequity for my students and their future. This district is my home because I have walked in the shoes of those left behind. I knew when I took on the responsibility of running for office to represent all people here, I needed to show up and listen to my neighbors. When I talk to voters across the district, I'm reminded that running to represent South Arlington means you're an advocate for people with disabilities who have been denied a seat at the table in Richmond. I've been that voice in my workplace for students with developmental disabilities and their families, and I'll do that as your next delegate. We need universal health care in Virginia. We need universal childcare. Our community deserves a healthy planet and high-paying union jobs, which I will fight for by helping to pass a Green New Deal. The current systems that we have were not built to uplift all of our people. I know a lot of us know that. from lived experience. We have a racist carceral system and an education system that doesn't humanize our disabled and neurodivergent students, and an economic system that allows the very rich to keep getting richer while the rest of us struggle paycheck to paycheck. And so our solution has to be fundamentally different to prevent the next pandemic, to address those inequities, and that's to guarantee our basic human rights through universal programs rather than prioritizing corporations and the wealthy few. Now, I'll concede, I haven't held elected office, so my experience is not typical, but every day when I wake up, I get ready for my class and I become a frontline worker. And during the pandemic, when my school administrators were not interested in protecting the rights of workers or young people with special needs, I began the hard work of organizing my coworkers into a union. And those hard conversations with people struggling resulted in organizing for our rights and winning our rights. Organizing our workplace gave us more ability to fight for specialized training, special ed certification, and one-on-one support in the classroom for our kids. Our hard work made it possible for me to help every teacher in my class, in my school, implement what I call the peace place, a designated area of the classroom to aid in sensory and emotional support without exclusion for children with autism and developmental disabilities. We got funding for art supplies and emotional visual aids, and to help create a more inclusive space that supports all of our kids. Every student and educator deserves that kind of dignified learning environment with the resources they need and teachers who value the strengths and support our children with disabilities. I will fight for that as your delegate because I value our teachers, children, and families. I look forward to answering all of your questions tonight and to build upon the hard work that you all have already done while creating a seat at the table for the disability community. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for that. And now we'll give things over to Delegate Levine to start us off with our next question. And here we're going to be asking about education. And this is an area where we got a lot of questions leading up to tonight. And Delegate Levine, as soon as you turn your camera on, there you are, I'll be able to pin you back up. So we got a lot. So the question we had sent to the candidates in advance was about how much inclusion matters and how there are a lot of barriers, including the way Children's Services Act funds work, that prevent students with disabilities not only from being included within their base school, but from even attending it. And in advance of tonight's forum, when we asked attendees for questions, we got more special education questions than on any other topic. So we would love to start there tonight. And they all tie back to that issue of inclusion. But for a little bit of perspective, they cited concerns about Virginia's failure to fully end restraint and seclusion. The 2020 report that came out from the US Department of Education citing gross failures in Virginia Department's education, special education services, and the challenge students with disabilities have faced during COVID, which again all comes back to how do we get students with disabilities safely in the classroom and fully included. So I know that's a lot of issues to tackle at once, and that's impossible to tackle at once, but kind of your thoughts on that general educational pathway forward, Delegate Levine.
Thanks, Lucy, for the question. You know, education is where folks with disabilities get really their start working with, being with outside of their parents and with the community. And when you sideline people with disabilities and you treat them as second-class students or second-class citizens or somehow separate or and unequal, then there's a stigma. I mean, we certainly learned that with racial discrimination. It's absolutely true with people with disabilities. Most people with disabilities can learn with other kids. They just need a little help with the things that they need help with. And we need to do everything we can to mainstream, because it's not just a question of educating, though that's certainly important in our schools. It's also a question of just the social education, and not just the social education for people with disabilities to be, because they, you know, part of our society, but social education for folks without disabilities, to treat people with disabilities with respect, with honor, with equality. So I think that's really important. Restraint and seclusion have been overused. One of the reasons why I introduced that bill into law in 2020 was to teach teachers not to use them. Seclusion doesn't need to be used, and restraint really only has to be used as an extreme last resort, basically when someone is actively harming someone else. But other than that, really, it should never come to that. and teachers who learn proper techniques of de-escalation, like the ones that new Virginia teachers are required to know because of my legislation. And by the way, teachers who aren't new are required to learn as well, but because it can be like a one-day education course, which is why my law actually requires a full, part of the training. It's a full course. It's not just sort of a one-day thing. But, we're trying to teach this with everybody. We're trying to teach this with the police as well as our teachers to say that folks with disabilities, are not acting up. They have disabilities. It's a mental health condition. It's just like any health condition. Would you scream at someone in a wheelchair for not getting up to walk or not standing up? I mean, folks with disabilities simply process some things differently and handle some things differently. And teachers need to understand that, and society needs to understand that. And that's, again, why we have to mainstream folks and not just the teachers, but teach the kids, the other kids, about that. I was a inner city school teacher many years ago, just for a semester, not for a long period of time. But we had folks with disabilities in the classroom, and it was critical that the teacher teach the folks with disabilities with the exact same respect as the other kids. Critical. Because let me tell you something. Kids know when someone is treated differently. They know when someone is separated from the pack, and they can be brutal about that. And that can lead to lifelong trauma, lifelong post-traumatic stress, lifelong just harm. And so we've done a lot. We do need to do more, Lucy, and I have fully committed to that in my work, and certainly would commit to continuing that work.
Thank you. We see and hear all the time about the lifetime of difference that makes when a student begins their life by being included in schools. And so now we'll hand that same question over about tackling inclusion in schools to candidate Elizabeth Bennett Parker.
Thank you for the question. We do know that inclusion in education is better for both students with disabilities and students without disabilities, and we certainly need to do more. Under the American Rescue Plan, Virginia is getting around $2.1 billion for K-12 education, and 77.7 million of that, I believe, is designated for students with disabilities. That is less than 2% of that funding. I believe that we should do more. Other state legislators across the country are directing more of those funds to special education, and I believe that Virginia should do the same. One of the biggest needs, I think, is teacher training and support in the classroom. I know that one possible solution suggested by the JLARC report from last year is to require any teachers looking to renew their licenses to go through special education training. However, we have an ongoing teacher shortage, and local school divisions are relying on provisionally trained teachers rather than just fully licensed teachers. And so we need to be broader in our reach than just when renewing licenses. And to that end, I think we also need to pay our teachers more across the board. Virginia ranks last in average teacher pay compared to the average pay of citizens. So it's perhaps not surprising that we have recruitment and retention challenges already. I think, additionally, we should bring back SB 1133 from last session, which would have established a pilot program utilizing CSA funds to support students returning to their public school, and would allow CSA funds to only be used in private schools that are licensed by the Department of Education, which is important given that private schools are not necessarily required to meet the same standards for reporting and transparency as public schools. And on a related note, looking at how the CSA funds are governed and moving those funds under the Department of Education, both to provide more oversight and transparency and to give the incentive to use those dollars in public school settings.
Thank you so much. So now we'll ask the same question of Delegate Hope, who alluded a little bit to special education in his opening there. How do we make special education more inclusive, especially knowing that folks with disabilities have been hard hit by COVID, and even before COVID, we weren't doing great?
Yeah, no, I mean, I think simply put, we need to provide more resources to our public schools. I've spoken to several parents who have had to send their kids out of Arlington Public Schools to another private school, even in another state, just in order to meet their needs. And I think that our public schools need to have the resources in order to do that and to meet their needs. On the seclusion and restraint, I mean, I mentioned that in 2014 is when this issue first came to light. To me, we had a parent whose child was restrained and secluded, and we asked that the Commission on Youth do a study, and I think that's the study that Delegate Levine is talking about, a bill that he put in, and I believe Senator Favola did as well too. and we need to make sure that that law is being implemented. And if it's not, we need to know about it, and we need to change the law or make put other precautions in place to order to make sure that that law is being enforced, or change the law, whatever we need to do. But certainly we need to make sure that people have the schools have the resources that they need to treat everyone equally, and to make sure that people with disabilities get a high quality education.
Thank you so much. So we'll now turn the question over to Delegate Lopez about how we make sure our schools are more inclusive.
Thank you, Lucy. We need to start by increasing our funding for special education in our public schools, and also guarantee that there's a system in place to make sure that this money is spent in a beneficial way. This requires increasing the frequency, as I said before, at which we review accessibility and support for students in special education. And now, as legislators, we should be receiving reviews every semester on the performance of our special education programs. What's working, what isn't working, and what else do we need to do to provide better supports? Because the support systems necessary for students with developmental disabilities are constantly changing. And our way to confront the challenges we face are constantly changing as well. But if we don't have a thorough and regular review system in place, we're going to consistently fall behind in this issue and let down those who need us most. This is also an issue that's been exacerbated by the Trump administration and Education Secretary Betsy DeVos. DeVos's solution was to cut funding for public education and push these students to go to private schools to get the support they need. Here's the problem with that. Many private schools are not covered by the Individuals with Education Disabilities Act, IDEA, and because of that, these schools actually have them sign away elements of their civil rights in order to attend. So not only do we need to expand our review process at the public education level, but we also need to strengthen our oversight of private schools, as I mentioned before, and how they are handling the situation. Simply put, she'll talk about restraint and seclusion. It's been overused in Virginia, and it's wrong. And I greatly appreciate the work that's been done in the past by Delegate Levine and Delegate Hope, who has been talking about this for years. Well, the work they've done in de-escalation and seclusion, and the work that they've done addressing this issue. And with the training and certification requirements that K through 12 teachers in Virginia must go through now, it's clear that to get certified, they should get this training in the future. And so with that, I'll hand it off.
Thank you so much. And so we'll hand the same question over to candidate Mehta for her thoughts on inclusive education and increasing that option for students with disabilities.
Thank you. This question is obviously so important to me because I'm a teacher. I have been on the front lines of fighting for an equitable public school system for many years. And let me tell you, I have seen those disparities and exclusionary school policies and the harmful effects that they have on our children firsthand. To me, it's unacceptable that the CSA forces students to uproot their lives, to leave their peers and their teachers, and move to a private school that often lacks oversight and accountability, only to receive the support that they need. These barriers are yet another reminder that many of the systems we have today in America are not only classist and racist, but ableist as well. And I'll be clear, we need massive investment in our school system, but throwing money at the problem alone will not fix equity. This is an insider perspective from a teacher. To turn that trend around, we need our community to come together and create a blueprint for schools that is rooted in compassion and dignity for all of our children, especially children with developmental disabilities. To me, that means removing police from our schools and replacing them with support professionals who won't resort to restraint and seclusion. I was so proud to see the Alexandria Public Schools took that step to end the SRO program, which means potential meaningful funding for professionals that can truly support our children. It means combating exclusion and sustainably rebuilding our school infrastructure with accessibility and equity built in, rather than tacked on at the end as an afterthought. And it means the elimination of overcrowded schools, reduction of class sizes, and elimination of corporate reforms like high-stakes standardized testing that prevents creativity and joyful learning and true integration of students with disabilities. It means universal after-school programs that also uplift our children. And it won't be a small price tag. but it is truly an investment that we must make for the well-being of future generations. I've personally seen children as little as 2 years old suspended or expelled from preschool because of, quote, behavior problems. That's why I led the effort at my school to fundamentally change the structure of our classroom rather than perpetuate seclusion, isolation, and exclusionary discipline policies. The millions that we have used and spent to traumatize our kids and funnel them into the school to prison pipeline should be divested and spent on guaranteeing that we're creating an environment that's thriving and joyful when they come to school. Those are our tax dollars. We deserve a say in whether that money goes towards schools that uplift everybody or continued exploitation. And as delegate, I'll fight for that, for fully funded equitable schools and a system that protects children with developmental disabilities from being pushed out, and ensuring that teachers are paid dignified salaries so that they can get the training they need for their labor of love. We need a teacher's voice in Richmond to fight for our kids, and I hope to be that for everyone.
Thank you so much. And so now we'll let Delegate Corey answer this question. And Delegate Corey, we'll give you a second there to unmute and let us know whenever you're able to speak.
Thank you. Can you hear me now, Lucy?
We can hear you clearly, so go right ahead.
Great. Thank you. And I want to thank you for putting this forum on. You are helping to bring attention, shine a light on a lot of parts of daily life for many Virginians that are not in the forefront of most people's minds or the press. Virginia is a Dillon Rule state, and because of that, we as a legislature need to focus on specific aspects and policies of special education, as well as increasing funding. For example, I spent a number of years working to require testing for dyslexia and the follow-up in our public schools. That's a specific action, but it required a specific piece of legislation. I also spent a lot of time getting vision testing in K-12, as well as working to require the teachers to reduce the seclusion and restraint. You all may remember that I did put in several bills on that. Fairfax County denied that there was any seclusion and restraint in Fairfax County, and therefore reported that they had no incidents of those. I was working with the Autism Self-Advocacy Association looking at seclusion and restraint. And one of the most important ways that we are going to be able to diminish and get rid of this practice is if reporting is accurate. And we have to require reporting with a penalty for school systems that do not report. That is key. Several people have mentioned private school standards of special ed. I was working with the Virginia Department of Education and put in a bill just this last session, which passed, that requires all private schools to have their special education programs evaluated and authorized, certified by the Virginia Department of Education. I heard from a number of parents who said that they had wished that this bill had come to fruition a lot sooner because they had some horrific experiences. But next year, this will be the case in Virginia. I've also been working on concussion issues. While that you may think that doesn't really apply to special ed, it does, because students who are suffering from concussions need to have special considerations. And it is a condition that is not visible. Most teachers don't understand how to work with students who are suffering from post-concussion syndrome. And I've worked with a lot of teachers and athletic trainers to come up with some protocol for dealing with this. I believe it can make a big difference. In the beginning of my introduction tonight, I neglected to mention that I chair the Cities, Counties, and Towns Committee, which is instrumental in directing localities to enact measures which allow inclusion in all government actions. As I mentioned before, because we're a Dillon Rule state, we have to be the legislature has to allow localities, enable them to deal with some of these problems in very specific language. I sit on the Finance Committee, and one of the wonderful things we're doing is working to revise the tax code, and that will make our tax code more inclusive and equitable. I'm also a member of the Public Safety Committee, and I have recently been appointed to the Autism Advisory Council. And a couple of days ago, I was appointed to a regional commission which will review healthcare equity. And I am really looking forward to diving into that work. I've been endorsed by teachers in every campaign that I have ever had. And I look forward to working with the teachers in the future. One of the issues that I was able to bring to fruition for the teachers in the last 2 sessions is mental health training. Why is mental health training important for teachers? Well, teachers need to understand the signs of different sorts of mental health problems in their students, and also understand how to deal with them, not necessarily the teacher, his or herself, trying to bring counseling to the student, but to know what resources to refer the student to, who to talk to, how to talk to the parents. Teachers have been asking for this training for quite a while, and we had a wonderful celebration at the bill signing of HB 74. I, at the moment, don't want to mention anything else except that I have been working with Lucy to develop a training program for judges. While let's see, as legislators, we interview candidates for judgeships. And in the past couple of years, I've taken the opportunity to basically grill them and ask them a lot of questions that have to do with special education and dealing with those with developmental disabilities in our criminal justice system. One of the things that became very apparent was judges don't understand and don't give much credence to a developmental disability condition in a defendant. There was a judge in Loudoun County who said on the record to the defendant, "Well, I think you're autistic whenever you want to be." And that promoted me to seek out Lucy, and we're working to develop hopefully a free modular system of modules that will be available to judges to help them understand the issues that they have to take into consideration if there is a defendant who has a developmental disability. And finally, I'm working now with the Architectural Association to develop school standards, physical standards, green space standards, light standards, air quality standards. And we hope that one day this will become a law in Virginia. If not, it will at least be an extremely important and well-informed advisory. And I think I probably used up my time and somebody else's. So thank you all for listening.
Thank you so much for sharing. And now, last but not least, to wrap up this question, we would love to turn things over to candidate Holly Hazard for her thoughts on inclusive education and furthering that here in Virginia.
Thank you again so much. Research on all kinds of issues tells us that children are going to respond better, to grow better when they're at home and they're in their own communities. And this issue of the CSA is all about money. We need to increase funding for schools generally, and certainly for special ed. And as importantly as the experience that the child with developmental disabilities may have, it is important for the other children to have a better learning experience so that they are exposed to all kinds of people at a young age. These kids will learn to treat children not as others, but as friends. School is the place where we learn to be adults. And this is the place for children to learn how to relate to people with disabilities and to learn the skills of accepting, thriving, and loving with them. We should work towards legislative solution that doesn't penalize families for wanting the best education, but also to remain as an intact family. We should amend the CSA to work towards serving as many students as possible in their own community settings. And in any event, all private schools should be licensed and have oversight so that we're not adding trauma to their life experience. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And so now we'll head over to candidate Bennett Parker for our next question. And we're going to hit on an issue I think that many of you have alluded to because it's what the ARCs are known for. So we need to end this waiting list of 13,000 people waiting for Medicaid waivers that pay for the most basic care and support. We also need to make sure that after people wait years or sometimes multiple decades for those Medicaid waivers, that we are paying enough that folks can actually hire staff to help them. Otherwise, it's really a false promise. So there's been a work group that the General Assembly formed this year that's going to put recommendations out this November that's going to focus on both those things, looking at the waiting list and also rates for Medicaid waiver providers. And we would love your thoughts, Elizabeth Bennett Parker, on how we end that waiting list and make sure waivers are paying enough to get people what they need.
Definitely, thank you. So I certainly look forward to seeing the recommendations from the work group. I understand that that includes representatives from the ARC and members with disabilities. It is unacceptable that we have a wait list of 13,000 people and that almost 4,000 of those are considered priority one. Other states have cleared their waiting lists. We know that people are moving out of the state because they're not getting the support here that they need. And that does not reflect the inclusive society and community that we want to have in the Commonwealth if we are literally forcing people with disabilities and their families to leave. And I don't know that we have any excuses not to expedite this issue at this point. Well, the American Rescue Plan is giving states an extra $12.67 billion for Medicaid home and community-based services. And my understanding is that can be used to help with waiting lists. I'm not entirely sure of the amount that Virginia, I haven't seen what the share of Virginia is or how much of that, how far it would go towards the 13,000 folks, but that amount is in addition to the $4.2 billion that Virginia is getting in direct recovery funding, some of which could also be allocated to this if needed. So very supportive of ending this as quickly as possible to make sure that folks have the support they need and presumably supporting the recommendations of the work group, provided they're addressing this urgently.
Thank you so much. And now we'll pass the same question over to Delegate Hope about ending the waiting list and funding those waiver services.
Well, I mean, this is a priority, and I think it has to be a priority. It's embarrassing that we haven't ended this list. And it's like I said, it's something that I put in a budget amendment year after year to add. We added about 1,000 this year, but really it's like playing a credit card and we're just paying the interest is the best that we're doing. We can redefine it. We can call it priority one and call it whatever you want, but we still have a 13,000 and growing list. Over the years, I've put in bills to find a permanent funding stream. I know we mentioned the American Recovery Act. We need a permanent funding stream. That money is going to dry up. We need to make sure that it is a line item that's in our law. And I think it actually might be unconstitutional that we are not providing the services to people and families with disabilities that are waiting. And I did put in a bill many years ago to try to be as clever as I possibly could, because I think that we have such a low tobacco tax. At the time, we were 49th out of 51, one of the worst tobacco taxes, lowest in the entire country. And bringing in that revenue, which would be over $300 million, just making that the national average, and we could plow that money and direct it towards the people with disabilities and to end that waiting list. I look forward to the recommendations that come out. I think there needs to be a clear timeline. I'm not looking about 10 years. I think it should be within 5 years. We need to end the waiting list. And to your point, Lucy, exactly right. We need to make sure that we pay people that are going into people's homes, the providers, the people who are taking care of those with disabilities, we're paying them an adequate salary. As chair of the Joint Commission on Healthcare, we are taking a look at how we're paying providers in home and community-based services. And so we need to look and see what information we can take from that study and apply it here. But it is absolutely critical that we end this waiting list. I've often joked, kind of half jokingly, but I'm half serious too, is that I will resign the day that we end this waiting list, just because it's so important to me that we do it. And we need a timeline and we need to stick to it. And I hope that when we do have that timeline, that the voters hold us accountable. It's that important.
Thank you so much. And now we'll ask that question of Delegate Lopez.
Thank you, Lucy. And you know, I was incredibly heartened by the work that was done over the last several months to form the work group. And as long as their recommendations include one of the following, I expect to support their recommendations. The first option, as has been alluded to by everybody, is putting a system in place that ends the waiting list within 2 to 5 years. Within 2 to 5 years. One of the main reasons the waiting list became an issue this past year was due to the pandemic. We increased our funding and dedication to support people with disabilities, and then we were forced to scale back some elements as more of our Medicaid funding was required to cover COVID-related health issues. So as we work to expand our Medicaid budget and pursued Medicaid for all, one of the issues we must immediately address is the wait list and providing it with the resources to end, it needs to end the wait list. Core home and community services for people with with disabilities is a COVID-related health issue. We've had this conversation in the past, and that assistance must be a right and not a paid-for privilege. So something I believe we can enact in the short term and pursue in the more immediate future is providing a stipend and necessary short-term coverage for people on the Medicaid wait list, and especially those with disabilities. There's a system for this already in place in DC and Maryland, and it's unacceptable we don't have it here in Virginia too. So many people who rely on these waivers are forced to spend more time and more of their own income on their personal health care while they wait. This is not acceptable, and we have a responsibility to make sure that we are always providing support for all Virginians, especially our most vulnerable. And you know, I've had this conversation with several folks in leadership, but you know, I think this summer session, when we're going back in the General Assembly, Patrick and I and everyone are going to be talking about the ID and DD waivers, and with these federal dollars coming in. And so I'm anxious to do that and to address that. But I also agree with Patrick that we need a permanent solution, not just one time, patchwork with federal dollars.
Thank you so much. And now we'll pass that question over to candidate Mehta about ending the waiting list and funding those waivers adequately.
Absolutely. It's abhorrent that there are over 13,000 people waiting for these Medicaid waivers. You know, like you said, while over 3,000 of those people are in an active state of crisis. When I hear statistics like that, I'm also reminded of the fact that thousands of young people in a state of mental health crisis in Arlington are prevalent every day, while our hospitals in Arlington only have 8 available beds for patients per day. You know, I think that's indicative of a healthcare system that has commodified our right to live. And I'm very excited to see the recommendations of the work group, because I know that there are critical voices being centered in those efforts. Right now, Medicaid waivers are the only long-term funding stream for people with disabilities. That means delays on one-on-one care attendance, job training, so many other resources that people need urgently, especially in this pandemic. We need to increase the amount of funding for our CCC+ waivers that allow elders with disabilities to live at home rather than go to a nursing facility, while we expand to fully fund mobile clinics in the 49th district. However, this pandemic didn't create these health inequalities and inequities. It exposed the crisis of our healthcare system that we've known about for decades. Our district is hurting. When I go door to doors and talk to voters and those left out of the political process, healthcare is their #1 issue. So in addition to supporting an end to that waiver waiting list, I also support legislation like Delegate Samira's bill to explore a universal healthcare system in Virginia and work with delegates to expand free community healthcare, mobile clinics, home care, and my personal favorite, in-school preventative health clinics for all of our public school students. The permanent solution is clear. It's hard to say out loud, but it is clear. We need universal single-payer healthcare, one that isn't tied to employment, that covers all people, and is free at the point of service. That's the antidote to ensure people with disabilities get the resources they need in the long term, and to end the bureaucracy that's often preventing people from receiving the healthcare that they need. And so many people might tell us that it's impossible or too expensive, and I disagree. The pandemic has proven that it should be every elected official's moral imperative to fight for universal health care rather than a for-profit health insurance industry and greedy pharmaceutical companies that have commodified that right to healthcare for us. So to safeguard that healthcare system, to end the waiting list, and to prevent privatization, we need to expand the Medicaid waiver program, but also work towards universal healthcare for all of our people.
Thank you so much. And now we'll ask the question about Medicaid waivers and their funding rates of Delegate Corey.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Lucy. When I was a school board member, Fairfax County School Board member, I assisted in the founding of the Independence Center, whose goals are exactly what the title says, to end dependence. And I think that is an attitude that we all need to adopt. The Independence Center, by the way, has been very successful, but it is an organization that struggles for funding, and it is a good example of a way that we can invest in creating lives like ours for everyone. Door knocking these past few days, I talked to a couple of parents who told me sadly of their adult son who died of autism a month ago. And that led me to look into the medical care and the medical resources needed to evaluate conditions like autism and not just assume that they are inevitable. I think that we have to pay more attention to the Autism Advisor Self-Advocating Association and the recommendations that they make. We are dealing with developmental disabilities through a pretty narrow lens, and that is not sufficient. And yes, of course, we have to get rid of the waiting list. There shouldn't be a waiting list. The concept is ridiculous, and we all need to find more funding. And as Patrick mentioned about cigarette tax, yeah, a number of us have put in cigarette tax bills that would direct the cigarette tax to important causes. Unfortunately, those bills did not pass under the Republican majority, but now there's a Democratic majority. So things could be very different. And I do look forward to working with Patrick Hope and Mark Levine in our August session to direct more money towards ending the waiver waiting list. We will be looking at how we are going to integrate the CARES money into the budget we already have. I'm also hoping that what will come out of that will be fairer wages for those who care for the disabled in their homes. And most of you know that Virginia has been cited by the federal government a number of times for what is basically an inadequate mental health system, period. So we need to move forward to where Virginia might actually be cited for a wonderful mental health program. Finally, one of the things the Disability Commission under my chairmanship will look at is ways that we can bring economic support to a parent or family member who has to step out of the workforce to care for a developmentally disabled family member. It's ridiculous that families have to give up income in order to stay home to provide proper care for a disabled, developmentally or physically disabled family member. And that goes along with providing fair wages for those who care for them in their homes. These are major issues that might take us more than 1 year to deal with, but we have to get started. So thank you for the opportunity to bring up these issues.
Thank you so much. And now candidate Holly Hazard, the same question to you.
Thanks so much. As others have mentioned, people have been waiting for months, years, or even decades to get this, to get the Medicaid waiver. And it's my understanding, I think someone referenced it, that the state granted 200 more waivers recently, but as we know, the bucket keeps filling up and keep filling up. So it's 13,000 and growing. We are forcing people to ratchet up to a crisis situation before they can get the waiver. They start at one level and then they wait and wait and wait, and then it becomes a crisis. And that is of course horrific for those people and their families, but it also exacerbates the cost to society. And when a crisis comes up, they're more likely to be conflicts with the police or with other folks. And again, it's ratcheting up both the cost and of course the trauma and negative experience for these people in their lives. And I understand, I believe from, I'm not sure, but I understand that Arizona has no wait list at all. And so I'm wondering why on earth would Virginia have this when Virginia is a relatively wealthy state? We have progressive Democrats in the legislature. There just doesn't really seem to be an excuse for this backload. And in particular, although I know this has come up very recently, and in particular with this, I don't know if I want to call it a windfall with it, but with this excess revenue that we've got both in the state and then of course now with the federal government, it's absurd that we haven't allocated the resources necessary to protect the vulnerable. And as someone else referenced, the Commonwealth made a commitment about a decade ago to get rid of this wait list. And still here we are with 13,000 people and growing waiting. And our economy has grown tremendously. And we have failed these families. This is not something that is static. These are people whose lives are going by. And I would just say that I would be likely to support the outcome of the work group, but I don't think we need a work group. It sounds to me that we all know and have known for a long time exactly what was needed, and that is an increased investment in helping people with their lives. So people's lives are passing by, and I don't think work group after work group is the answer. I think sort of stepping up and figuring out how we can best use our funding to help these folks and to dig out of this hole. And then, of course, as Delegate Hope says, it's important to figure out how we don't get back in the hole again, to figure out some funding source that is permanent to ensure that we're treating Virginians in the best way that we can. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And so last on this question, we'll turn things over to Delegate Levine.
Thank you, Lucy. You know, the IDDD waivers, it's kind of like a sinking boat. And the boat is sinking, the boat is sinking. And so what do? We bail out a little bit of water. We did provide more funding this year. In fact, we provided more funding, as Delegate Lopez points out, and then COVID came and took it away, and then we put it back in. But at the end of the day, every year we have more water in the boat. Every year it gets worse, not better. If we're not at the very, very least emptying more water out than comes in, the boat will continue to sink. And it's people's lives. It's absolutely people's lives. The folks who have the waiver can take care of the folks in need and survive and be in our society and have a full range of resources. And those that don't, they're struggling. You know, we have this priorities list. We're like, okay, so there's too much water in the boat. We'll just focus on the priorities. And then we didn't even fund all of those. And so, you know, I can't tell you how many times I've heard a constituent say, you know, I'm 70 years old and my daughter is 43. And what's going to happen when I'm 80? And what's going to happen when I'm 90? And who's going to take care of her? And we've been waiting 20 years for a waiver and it's not there. And I think we have to remember what the purpose of these waivers are. I don't think we talk about that enough. The reason it's a waiver, the reason we use that term, is because it's a waiver from institutionalization. If the point was to put people in the community, in the homes where they belong because we can take care of them. Otherwise, they would be institutionalized, which not only, of course, is terrible for the folks with disabilities, but costs the state a lot more. So it is cheaper to fund these waivers, but that was the deal, that was the bargain. If we're going to release folks from institutions and save the state money, we have to fund these waivers. It was a deal. And we're not keeping our end of the deal. And a lot of states are. And we're not. And so I agree with my colleagues that say, you know, good for the federal money, use the federal money, good for the excess budget money, use that. But we need a permanent answer. I mean, let's bail out the boat, but then let's seal the hole. And to seal the hole, absolutely increase tobacco taxes. Maybe some of those marijuana taxes can go to that. I'd even be fine with a bullet tax for people who buy guns and use it, you know, just for fun. People like to shoot at targets. Well, you know what? Maybe they could help fund some of these waivers. So there's lots of ways to get it. You know, I've long supported universal health care. I support Medicare for all who want it. I support mental health parity. I've long supported all of that. But I'm not going to wait. I'm not going to say that when we have that, it'll work. Great, I support that. In the meantime, we've got to empty the boat.
Thank you so much. And so for our last question, we'll go back around to all the candidates, and you're getting a 2-for-1 special here on your last question at the Disability Candidate Forum. So we'll give each candidate about 2 minutes. First, to share your thoughts on how we take the best lessons from COVID. We've learned how we can make employment more accessible for everyone, including people with disabilities. Testimony at the General Assembly, more accessible for everyone. How special education can be delivered in a variety of settings for people with medical fragility. So how do we take the best of those ideas and make sure they don't get lost when we go back? And then with the last minute, anything you else wanted to share? So any links you wanted to put in the chat or any reminders about your campaign or voting in your closing statement? And Delegate Hope, please fire away.
All right. Well, thank you, Lucy. And I want to thank everyone for hosting, Connor, especially for pulling all this together and bringing us together. And I want to thank the ARC of Northern Virginia as well for just being such a great advocacy organization and really filling up our inboxes. And we're in person. I look forward to seeing you in person in Richmond in the next session. But I do think that when we do go back to the new normal, there will be, of course, opportunities for the public to participate. And I do believe that the virtual aspect will live on beyond COVID, because it's been, as a chair of a major committee, it's been really important to hear from family members, especially coming from Arlington. You spend 2 hours on the road to go down to testify on a bill. You might wait in a committee room for another 2 or 3 hours just to speak for a minute or two. And that can be very difficult for families. That can be difficult for so many people that might have to take off work and be there. But to be virtual, we've had experience with that this year, that more and more people get to participate. And that's, of course, good for our democracy. And I do hope, and I've had meetings with the speaker and I've had meetings with the clerk of the House, that aspect of it will survive. And I'm hopeful that we'll be in person, and some people that can be there, but at least we'll be able to go to the public and have them beam in to present their testimony, which is much more convenient. Look, there's no blueprint for COVID. And, the last time we went through a pandemic, anything like this, was 100 years ago. And so you're seeing a lot of the advocacy in action. I mean, I spent many hours on the phone with our local health department and the governor's office to get questions and answered about when vaccines can be had for people with disabilities in group homes and people who work in group homes, and trying to advocate that they get into the phase 1A aspect of it. And so, and a lot of that has been helpful in that advocacy. We passed a law this past session, I think it was Delegate Kathy Tran's bill, about giving rights to people with disabilities who are in the hospital to make sure that they have someone with them, because it can be absolutely horrifying and terrifying to be in a hospital when you're all locked down and you're by yourself. And so these kinds of things, we've changed the law, and that's a permanent way. That's the blueprint to make sure that we are being responsive to people with disabilities. But most importantly, it's about your advocacy. Tell us what went right and what went wrong. This is a great opportunity to look back and see what we can learn from this pandemic and what we can do better. And having that lines of communication open where you can advocate and we can change the law. We changed a great law. I don't know that it's been mentioned today. Delegate Bourne had a bill in which we allowed people with a disability to present evidence of their disability to establish intent. And that can go a long way in helping keeping people out of prison and out of jail. So it's things like that you bring to us. That's the way to make things more permanent, is to change the law where we can. We spent a lot of time talking about the waiting list. I know I've gone over 2 minutes, but it's a funding issue. We've got to have more funding. We've got to make sure that we have more revenue. There's so many needs in human services, and it's not just people with disabilities, but there's so many needs in human services. We've got to change our revenue structure and make sure that we as a society plow more money into helping our most vulnerable populations. I'll stop there, but Lucy, thanks again for having me, and thank you, Connor, as well.
Thank you so much for joining us. And we'll pass that wrap-up combo question over to Delegate Lopez for his thoughts about how we take the best of COVID for everyone and move forward, and any closing words you'd like to offer.
So thank you, Lucy. Thank you, Connor. Thank you, everyone, for being here tonight. And thank you to the ARC and everyone for organizing this event. As your delegate, I've been steadfastly committed to expanding healthcare access and combating COVID-19. I advocated consistently for broadening access to the vaccine and ensuring it was distributed equitably, including to people with disabilities. I'm proud that while many states distributed strictly by age, that Governor Northam ensured that Virginians with pre-existing conditions and disabilities were placed at a higher risk tier, and that direct service workers and caregivers were prioritized even higher. While there were definitely some glitches in distribution, Virginia's COVID-19 registration website was one of the most accessible in the country, according to Johns Hopkins, their University Disability Health Research Center. And I was glad to see that Governor Northam had a number of local jurisdictions successfully encourage collaborations, such as the 2-day vaccination clinic for people with disabilities and caregivers that Arlington's Independent Center of Northern Virginia did in partnership with local public health officials. I'm also glad, as Patrick mentioned, that we passed Kathy Tran's bill to ensure that support personnel can accompany people with disabilities into hospitals, and also a bipartisan bill that we passed to end transplant discrimination against individuals with disabilities, including developmental disabilities. But really, this is just the beginning. What we need to do to ensure health equity for people with ID and DD disabilities. And so what we need to do is we need to start by ensuring that Virginians with intellectual and developmental disabilities are not invisible, that their social determinants and their health outcomes are not invisible. We need to emulate the Biden administration and strengthen our data collection and our health surveys and programs. And without data, we're not able to identify disparities in social determinants of health and health outcomes for people with intellectual and developmental disabilities. This will allow us to identify where interventions are needed. We also need to review our Commonwealth's crisis standards of care to make sure that they line up with the best practices and avoid problematic practices highlighted by the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services Office of Civil Rights Settlements during the COVID-19 pandemic. There's so much more that we need to do beyond this, and I want to hear your ideas and recommendations as to how we can do better for Virginians with intellectual and developmental disabilities. And here's the thing, in terms of, we also need to, and I support, making Virginia an employment first state, as well as, we passed the Guzman disability employment legislation to create a streamlined hiring pathway into Virginia state government, as well as incorporating protection of disability rights in the Virginia Human Rights Code. We also have expanded tuition-free community colleges for high demand fields. The thing is, Virginia's law directs certain agencies to make referrals to employment service organizations that provide competitive employment and pay commensurate wages to workers with disabilities. We need to do better. These employment service organizations are eligible to receive state-funded support services for employees with disabilities. The law doesn't abolish sub-minimum wages, as I mentioned before, or prohibit sheltered workshops, but it does require individuals with disabilities to make an informed choice about pursuing work in a sheltered workshop or working for sub-minimum wages. Maryland's gone further, phasing out sub-minimum wages in the statewide, as has President Biden, who's now mandating federal contractors be paid $15 an hour. Virginia should join this movement and adopt legislation to abolish sub-minimum wages, which I will work to support and help pass. So thank you all for being here tonight. Thank you for your amazing questions. Thank you for your advocacy. I'm very proud of the work we've done over the last 10 years. And I'm very proud also to be endorsed for re-election by US Senators Tim Kaine and Mark Warner, Congressman Don Beyer, Governor Ralph Northam, former Governor Terry McAuliffe, former school board chair Emma Viola Sanchez, and county board members like Walter Tejada, Speaker Eileen Fillicorn, so many members of the House of Delegates, so many members of the state Senate, Jeff McKay, Fairfax County Board of Supervisors, Christina Diaz-Torres, Reed Goldstein, David Priddy, as well as the Virginia Education Association, the Arlington Firefighters and Paramedics, the Virginia chapter of the National Organization of Women, so many environmental groups, so many labor groups. I hope to have your support as well, because they understand, as I do, that politics is about getting things done and improving people's lives. I hope to continue working with the ARC of Northern Virginia and all the advocates on this call to improve everyone's lives, all Virginians. Thank you very much for your time tonight.
Thank you so much for your time. And now we'll pass the mic over to candidate Mehta for the same wrap-up question.
Thank you so much. The reality is that the disability community has been deprioritized, not just during this pandemic, but like so many other marginalized communities, has not been heard or advocated for. And we know that the healthcare, housing, and education systems in this country were not built to uplift all of our people. The pandemic didn't create those inequities, but exposed the cruelty of commodifying our human needs, things like food and housing and healthcare. So while families in the 49th district struggled, corporations, developers, and telecom companies have profited billions this year. So our lesson should be that now is not the time to return back to normal or go back to how things were, because the honest truth is that many systems have not worked for the majority of us. And so now's the time to bring the disability community and other marginalized people into the political process and to demand a seat at the table. I know that we haven't had much time tonight to talk about some of the other important issues, but I know many of you followed and advocated for Matthew Rushin, a 22-year-old autistic Black man who was sentenced to a decade in prison after pleading guilty with no trial in Virginia. Matthew had a seizure related to his autism, and instead of being medically evaluated or given medical care for his mental health crisis, police arrested him and a judge sentenced him to 10 years in prison. This is one of so many examples that police do not keep our communities safe, that prisons have kept people with disabilities in inhumane and undignified conditions and continue to criminalize those with disabilities. We also didn't have a chance to talk tonight about workers and how to promote employment for people with developmental disabilities. And for me, the best way to remove those barriers is through collective bargaining in the workplace and holding employers accountable to workers with disabilities by ensuring pay equity and full benefits. As a teacher who's unionized my preschool, I saw how important a union was to prevent discrimination and to uplift people with disabilities in my own workplace. We've seen significant shifts away from traditional working conditions, and so I also want to invest more in accessible options like telework for all of our people. And so we need to keep exploring that, being creative and pushing back against the narrative that we need to go back to work and go back to work the way things were. I want that for people everywhere. And it's why I stood in solidarity with our union siblings outside of Senator Warner's home to demand that he support the PRO Act, which guarantees workers the right to unionize. And we also have to ensure housing as a human right to protect everyone in the next pandemic. Even one displaced family is too many because displacement is entirely preventable. Plain and simple, it's a policy failure that people who have always called Arlington home cannot afford to stay and build a life here. And it begs the question, who is Arlington being developed for and designed for? We all deserve to call Arlington home, not just the people who can afford it. And so as we say, nothing about us without us. And we aren't taking our human needs for granted anymore. I hope that we can be courageous and come together as a community to demand that quality of life that we all deserve. And preventing the next crisis will also mean that we take on the wealthy and those large corporations in Virginia that are not paying their fair share in taxes. And so if we organize for our needs and prioritize people over greed and corruption, we can build a Commonwealth that truly works for everyone and safeguards our community in the face of yet another pandemic that might occur. I'm in this fight with you, and I hope that you'll join me in this fight for the 49th district, and I hope to earn your vote on June 8th. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. And now over to Delegate Corey.
Thank you, Lucy. Again, thank you for this opportunity. You started the question for this last round with mentioning the opportunities to learn from the COVID emergency. And I think that is a very, very important question that we need to ask ourselves. We are accustomed to so many of the institutions in our society, and in COVID, many of them simply haven't functioned in the way that we have become accustomed to. And now is a time to step back and evaluate and reconfigure or perhaps discontinue some of the institutions and practices that we have all grown up with. One of those institutions is SROs. You all may know that I have been working on defunding SROs at the state level. That legislation didn't pass, but I've been working with a number of groups like the NAACP to continue to push, because the discipline records that are recorded by the Secretary of Education in Virginia, and I'm sure it's a low reporting, show that disabled students and students of color are the ones who are disproportionately disciplined and referred into the court system by SROs. That's a travesty. That's something we can't tolerate. That's something that we have to end. Hear me now, we have to end it. We're also talking about some of the things we may have learned, hopefully we've learned, about educating students with disabilities. And I know the Secretary of Education is very eager to use what we've learned in this COVID crisis and employ it to lift up and empower the students with disabilities in our public school system. And I'm looking forward to working with him through the Disability Commission and the Autism Advisory Council. One thing that we learned, and some of my colleagues have mentioned, is that the transparency of government action has been really, really important. And virtual meetings, the General Assembly have allowed a whole new group of people to watch us and comment and participate. That transparency we will continue, but the transparency at the state level is only the beginning. We need to have transparency of government actions at all government levels. This is an issue many of you have heard me talk about for years. And I am now, because I'm the chair of the Cities, Counties, and Towns Committee, able to form a task force where we will look at what is required by governments at all levels to share with the public and to be open and transparent. This is something that we should have learned a long time ago, but now we have the opportunity to reform and open up so more people can participate and understand what I said their governments do at all levels. I think it's particularly key, frankly, at the local level and especially with the school board. Delegate Mugler is also very interested in this and is going to work with me on it. I too, like Alfonso, have a long list of organizations and people who have endorsed me, our federal representatives, our teachers, our labor organizations, and many environmental organizations like Clean Virginia, the Sierra Club, League of Conservation Voters, and Emily's list and Virginia's list, as well as a number of local Muslim organizations that advocate for awareness of the needs of Muslim students and families in the institutions that we are also used to living with in our society. I will not continue my list, but I want you to know that the endorsements that I've received are based on my past accomplishments, not on my promises of what I will do or think should be done in the future, but on solid accomplishments, which is one of the reasons why I am so proud and happy to have been named a champion by NARAL, for example. So with that, Lucy, I will make myself stop talking. And again, I thank all of you for letting us be here tonight.
Thank you so much. And now, candidate Holly Hazard, your time to wrap up.
Thank you so much. First, we'll touch on the question about future pandemics. I think that the developmental disability community should be at the forefront of vaccination priorities should we ever find ourselves in this position again, which we're all hoping we will not. Often they are likely to be more compromised health-wise, and they're likely to be interacting with frontline workers. And this time we were all caught a bit flat-footed. We, of course, from the pandemic, but also we didn't, if everyone remembers back to the past presidency, we didn't expect the states, as opposed to the federal government, to be leading our response. But we should plan for this next time. We should hope that it won't be the case, but plan for this next time. And we need to have a conversation early, not in the middle of the pandemic, about what priorities should be and what the differing needs of all of our citizens and residents should be. We need to educate the public on all kinds of areas, and certainly those who are likely to interact with people with disabilities in an emergency. They need to be a part of this. Hospital workers, public health workers, public health volunteers should all be educated on serving people with developmental disabilities. But mostly we need to listen to different points of view on all issues, but certainly on this one, as we develop our next pandemic response, and to learn from your experiences and then translate that into public policy. And in closing, I just want to touch on one issue that we haven't spent a lot of time on, and I will just simply touch on it. But my understanding is that 30% or more of those who are incarcerated reportedly have one or more developmental disabilities. And criminal justice reform, of course, is a bigger issue than intellectual disabilities, but Black men on the autism spectrum are much more likely to have significant conflicts with the police. And we need to have Commonwealth attorneys educated on this issue and judges to take intellectual disability into account when they are deciding cases. And of course, as has been referenced in the past few years, the first person on the scene should not always be the police. And we need police trained on the best way to diffuse a situation, not to antagonize it. And we need social workers, not police, to respond to someone in crisis. We need to invent a culture that's inclusive of people with disabilities in our schools, our workplace, our social events, and our communities, so that when someone encounters someone talking to themselves or exhibiting behavior that seems odd, it's not a unique experience. And their first reaction isn't, I need to call the police, but rather, how can I help? I'd like to help, and I'd appreciate your support for my candidacy for House District 38. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And now Delegate Levine, your chance to wrap up with us here tonight.
So thank you, Lucy. A shout out, a special thank you to Connor. This is the second forum I participated in that Connor has organized. I think you've done a terrific job, Connor, and I really appreciate it. It's also a shout out to Sharon, because let me tell you, the parents, I mean, I know for me, my parents are my rock that I rely on and have my entire life. And I know you're Connor's rock. And I just want to thank you for a lifetime of commitment to him and to this cause. To Lucy, you and I have worked together for many years. I hope to continue that work for many years to come. The ARC is amazing, both in advocacy and also just being there when we need you. When I had, and I'm still working on guardianship reform, still working on reaching out to folks who are in nursing homes or in institutions and don't have advocates for them. And you and I will continue that battle. I want to thank you for that. And I also want to thank our two interpreters for all the great work they're doing. The question was, what have we learned from COVID? And I think, and we've talked about many, many things here, and I'm gonna try not to go on as long as some of my colleagues. Y'all heard me in detail, the Lieutenant Governor debate. So if you want to hear more from me on all these issues, you know, I know that's being saved and you should go there. But the question about that we've learned from COVID, I think the heart of the question is we've learned that we have real problems in our society, and COVID just uncovered them. We have real problems of inequality. There's wealth inequality, there's racial inequality, and there's absolutely disability inequality. And COVID just made everything so much worse that some folks who were ignoring it couldn't ignore it anymore. So when it comes to folks with disabilities, for example, the first people harmed in COVID, the early deaths, where did they come from? They came from institutions, they came from nursing homes, they came from assisted living facilities. I was very active and pushed the governor quite hard to say, we need to step it up. And you know what? We did. We didn't do it originally, but due to my advocacy and the advocacy of many colleagues, we did step it up. We did solve that problem. Well, let's go further. Let's recognize that people and institutions need advocates. I'll give a shout out to Delegate Corey for the idea of supported decision-making. Myself working on the guardianship bill, making sure that people aren't isolated. It has to do with seclusion as well. People need advocates. Connor has his advocate with his mother. Everyone should have an advocate. Because frankly, and I've been working with people with Alzheimer's, I mean, Connor can advocate for himself, but not everybody can. Not everybody can. And so we've got to get people in the room advocating. And if there's a pandemic, one of the bills that we supported and that became law in the House of Delegates, but it was temporary for the pandemic, was to allow people to come in wirelessly, to come in virtually, because of COVID, people couldn't come in physically. Well, why can't we continue that? Why can't we continue virtual visitation? Maybe someone lives in Virginia and someone else is in California, and we need to to recognize, and I think we do. I think this is going to come out of this pandemic. This is the good news. This is the silver lining to the cloud, is that we're going to increase virtual access, and that's going to be for folks in nursing homes. That's going to be for people who work in meetings. It's actually something that Elizabeth Bennett Parker and I worked on together. A bill she brought me that I got passed into law to allow localities to have more virtual meetings. And, you know, I'm the chair of the Virginia Transparency Caucus. I started this battle back 6 years ago on my second day in office to say that we needed everything live streamed and archived so the public could watch what we were doing. And now with the pandemic, we are listening to the public. As Delegate Hope pointed out, we get to hear your testimony. You don't have to come down to Richmond. We've got to keep that going. That's a very important thing. We have to keep telehealth going. Again, people can't always be in the room. So let's use telehealth. A lot of times that's cheaper, frankly, than visiting a doctor. There are many, many things to be done with telehealth. I'm trying not to go on and on. I'll say this, with vaccines, with testing, what we've learned is that people with disabilities were left out and needed prioritization. We cannot let that happen again. The Values Act in 2020 left out people with disabilities. I fought to include it. I'm the chief co-patron of the bill to include people with disabilities in 2021. You know, evictions, the list just goes on and on about the inequalities. And I think, I hope, I pray that the lesson of COVID is that we remember these inequalities have always existed and COVID just exacerbated them. And it's up to us to make sure that it never happens again. As for my campaign, I have a long list of endorsements from the House, from the Speaker on down. Everyone in the House who's endorsed in this race has endorsed me. Everyone in the Senate, save one, has endorsed me. Lots of groups, labor and clean energy. And the heart of it is this: when you're voting, ask who has the experience and the heart. You got to know how to solve a problem, and you got to have the will to solve the problem. And I think I've shown from my experience and my heart, this is something I care about, this is something I work toward, this is something I will continue to work toward in whatever capacity Virginians elect me. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you very much. And last but not least, we'll give the final word of the night to candidate Elizabeth Bennett Parker.
Thank you so much. I think I might be standing between some folks and dinner at this point, so I'll attempt to be brief. I think the initial question, as we build an equitable recovery, I think there are many lessons that we can learn, and we know that COVID has exacerbated inequities that already existed. I think we need to keep adaptations that have been made because of the pandemic, like continuing to allow parents to be paid as the caregivers for their children under the age of 18, which other states allow, or continuing to allow virtual services, which takes away the challenge of transportation. But really across the board, a state delegate should be centering people with disabilities and their families when making policy decisions, which is to say nothing about you without you. And it's important that we make our government and our policy making process more accessible. This ranges from our state websites. I know the COVID information website was not very accessible, to making sure all of our polling places are accessible, to making it easier to participate in the policy process. Back before COVID, as Delegate Levine mentioned, I began advocating for changes to state law that would allow more flexibility for individuals to participate remotely in public meetings. The law severely restricts this ability if you're a member of a public body, whether that's an appointed advisory commission like our Commission on Persons with Disabilities, or an elected body. And the law limits that to 2 times per calendar year, regardless of the number of meetings. And the only exception is if you yourself have a medical condition. It did not make any exceptions for caregivers. And given my own experience, I advocated for changes and built a broad coalition to get that passed in Richmond. And so beginning on July 1st, there will be increased flexibility, including an exception for members who need to care for a family member. Similarly, as has been brought up, would like to see the General Assembly keep the opportunity to testify remotely. I've also advocated for us to do that at the local level, not only to allow simultaneous remote testimony, but to allow people to submit an audio or a video file, recognizing that they may not be available at whatever unpredictable time their item comes up on the docket. I think I have valuable experience and perspective to bring to this role, given my experience serving at the local level, running a local nonprofit, as well as a small business, and look forward to working with all of you to build back better. There are so many issues that we didn't get to tonight, but happy to engage more. My email address is elizabeth.FORdelegate@gmail.com. And thank you again to Connor and Sharon and Lucy and everyone watching for your time.
Thank you so much for being here with us. So we will now give one final virtual round of applause and thank you to our candidates for all the incredible work that they and their campaigns did preparing for tonight and being here. Their time is incredibly valuable and their support means a whole lot to the disability community, knowing that they wanted to come and share their thoughts. So now we're going to take a moment and gather a little bit more of your thoughts. So you should see a poll in front of you about tonight if you were a participant. Our panelists will not see the poll. So it'll tell us whether or not you learned what you had hoped tonight, and it will collect some demographic information because it's so important to us to make sure that we have families of all walks of life and all experiences that are here representing their views and hearing from our candidates. We had so many great questions for tonight that got sent in advance and chatted in tonight that we didn't have a chance to get to. As you saw, as it was, we ran long. So I'm going to go ahead and make sure that we get those questions over to Sharon, who shares them with the candidates after the fact. The candidates don't have a chance to answer us live after the fact, but certainly those questions make a statement, right? They talk about what's important to you, and it's another way to make your voice heard. You all have been tremendous advocates tonight, and we are so grateful for your time being with us. I'll leave that poll up for a minute, but we wanted to remind everyone that Virginia's primary is June 8th, and you can vote in person. You can vote in person ahead of time. You can vote by mail. The deadline to register was yesterday, May 17th, but you can still register for the general election if you hadn't had a chance yet. And if you have any questions about voter registration, accessibility of the polls, or any other general election and disability questions, I personally am very happy to be of service to you anytime for free. And I will be on deck on social media and email and any way you can get me while the election is happening to make sure that we're as responsive as possible to people who are encountering any barriers, to make sure we resolve them not only for you now, but for others in the future. Because like we saw tonight, one person's story and one person's advocacy can totally open an elected official's eyes to an issue, and that has ripple effects for years to come and for the thousands of people with disabilities across Virginia. Thank you all again for being with us. We'll let our candidates head on their way. I'll give one more minute here on the poll and we'll wrap up for tonight. Thank you all so much for joining us. I see a few more folks.
Thank you, everybody.
The poll there. Thank you all. If you're seeing this forum recorded at a later date, you will not see the poll live on your screen. So now you're just being dazzled by my vocal stylings here, if you will, but we're going to wrap that up in just a second. We want to thank everybody so much for coming tonight.